Ambassador, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Gracias. Para mí es un honor encontrar ustedes. Shalom.
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 Well, the Jewish world will be celebrating soon because we are approaching the 70th anniversary of the 181 resolution in which Soviet Union voted in favor of the creation of the State of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
From your point of view, what do you think happened afterwards? Why have Russia and Israel been on opposite sides throughout history?
Well, this is a good historical question because, as you understand, after Second World War, then during which Russia and major countries have been allies. Unfortunately, the hopes for cohesion, for united fight for better world, etc., they didn't been fulfilled. In famous speech in Fulton, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Churchill, announced about the Iron Curtain, etc., and Cold War started. And you have to understand well the geopolitical situation at that time. It was a confrontation of two camps. Socialist camp led by Soviet Union and Western countries. It was a fight of two ideologies, communist and liberal. It was really, everything was done on a principle, what is good for you, has to be bad for my enemies, etc., etc. And of course, you have to look into the picture from this point of view. And you remember very well what happened in 1947, because the British mandate for Palestine was coming to end. Great Britain didn't want to continue it, and we had to make a solution how to organize and how to settle this big international problem. And I can tell you it was Soviet Union, my minister, Andrei Gromyko, who in his famous speech in the UN in New York said that it's evident that Palestinians and Jewish people, they don't want to live in one state, because one of idea was just create a federation or different forms of a state, that we have to do two separate states. And it was this statement by my minister which really gave green light, and it showed that Soviet Union will be in favor of creation of a Jewish state. And maybe you know that we have been very instrumental. We were first ones to recognize Israel immediately de facto, and then de jure just several months later. Well, if we speak again, what happened, what was the motivation? First of all, it was, I think, very moral understanding of sacrifices and the victims which Jewish people suffered during Second World War, especially during the Holocaust. Secondly, you have to know that Russian history is very deeply interconnected with the history of Jewish people. And also, as I mentioned, have been just these geopolitical things, which at that time all Arab worlds have been just under the British influence and British domination. And creation of independent Israel, from our point of view, from point of view of our leaders of my country at that time, might be like a little peak to the British Empire. And what happened later? First of all, you have to recognize, and I read the memoirs of Golda Meir, where during the first Arab-Israeli war in 47, 48, 48, 49, it was thanks to the Russian weapons, Soviet weapons, you know, that have been supplied not directly but through Czechoslovakia, from other socialist countries which existed at that time, and the contribution to the victory of Israel at that time of weapons who came from Soviet Union, from my country, it was absolutely evident. But again, after, you know, it was really this spirit of confrontation, of geopolitical, and my leader at that time, Stalin, was thinking that Israel will have more or less neutral, or, you know, let's say its own line, but it was quickly evident that Israel is conducting a policy which has been rather, I would say, in different direction, looking to Western countries. And later, with revolution in Egypt, in Arab countries, became very strong feeling of independence, etc., etc. But officially, if you remember, relationship between Russia and the Soviet Union and Israel have been just broken in 67. 67, when during the six days war, then well, I'm not, you know, we can go too long to the history, remembering 56, then, you know, Egypt nationalized Suez Canal, and, you know, Israel, France, and England just started the war. When we speak about 67, when it was a first aerial attack by Israel, though true, that time also have been very, animosity between two sides have been very high. But, well, we broke relations 67 because of solidarity with Arab states. But later on, the reason and the wisdom and the understanding that Soviet Union, Russia, they have very close ties and humanitarian ties, historical ties with Israel prevailed. And finally, as you know, in late 80s, relationship started to move, and we re-established our relations in 91.
So how would you describe the relationship between Israel and Russia today?
Well, I can tell you the quality of relations can be manifested by the quantity of contacts on high level. My president speaks to Prime Minister Netanyahu almost every week. We had visits of my president. I'm speaking about President Putin to Israel, several visits. Just recently we had a visit of our Prime Minister Medvedev. Mr. Netanyahu was in Russia several times. Just recently we had two big important visits. Senor Edelstein, who is a president of a parliament, of a Knesset. He was just in, I think, in May or just end of April in Russia with official visit. We had visit of Mr. Lieberman, who is your Minister of Defense. Well, we have, I can tell you that we have very close, very, I would say, strong relationship. And this is not only on political level, but also on humanitarian level, on economic level, on cultural level. Well, and I can tell you, for example, I'm proud that I'm always invited by representative of Jewish community here in Mexico when we have to commemorate big dates in history of world history, of history of Russia, or history of Israel, or the Second World War. For example, just recently, then we have been commemorating in late April the Holocaust Day, Shia Day, I was invited by Jewish College, with some other ambassadors, to speak about the contribution of a Red Army of Soviet Union that time in liberation of concentration camps in Germany. And this is a fact which you cannot deny. We have now about 1.5 million people in Israel who speak Russian.
Sure.
They are not all Russians, of course. There are mixed families, there are Jewish families. We all have one, let's say, past, one common past. They all come from former Soviet Union, from Russia. It speaks about this, ties. And I really can tell you that when I was in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, you walk on the streets and you can always hear Russian language.
And the Russian women are the most beautiful women in Israel.
Well, I would guard my comments.
A topic that worries the whole world is Islamic terrorism. Great politicians and journalists believe that Russia can help end the situation. How viable do you believe this is?
Well, what is obvious, absolutely, and we have been saying about that since many years. Nobody can win terrorism by itself. You can just suppress some manifestations. You can be effective of just, shutting down one cell or another one. But in a general, as a terrorism, I remember very well, I was already in diplomatic service when we had this tragic accident during Olympic Games in Munich in '72. I remember very well this tragic incident in Entebbe. Then a plane of El Al was just seized and so on. It shows that the roots are long, terrorism existed long before than today. And it is obvious that all countries have to join forces together. Russia, Israel, United States, and this is France or whatever, who can really contribute to fighting terrorism, because terrorism, this is an international phenomenon. And you can't have double standards. There is no good terrorism or bad terrorism. I am not going now to speak about situation in Syria, because as you know, there are some forces which some people say they are good ones because they are opposition in Assad. They are at the same time they are very bad ones, who they are members of ISIS. But again, there is no good terrorism or bad terrorism. That's why Russia is very strong from this point of view, and we really seek for alliances, we seek for cooperation, and from this point of view, Israel, who has a very big experience fighting terrorism, is very helpful, and we really work together on this subject.
On October of last year, Russia voted in favor of UNESCO resolution which affirmed that there was no connection between the Jewish people and the Mount Temple in Jerusalem. What is your opinion on this matter?
Frankly, I think all issue of that resolution or this decision of a commission of UNESCO, it was not main resolution of UNESCO which has a juridic value, it was just position of a commission, is a little bit, I think, over politicized. First of all, as far as I understand, the same kind of resolution has been taken many years and with same content. This last year, specific one, was speaking about the safety of Muslim mosque or whatever on a mountain. First of all, it is not directed against Israel or Jewish people. Nobody, any reasonable people, cannot deny the importance and connections. And what is very important, remember that this mount is just, how it's Temple Mount, this is very sacred for three religions, Jewish, Muslim and Christian, that Jerusalem is a city of three monotheistic religions. And by the way, in this resolution of last year, it is set in preamble. That's why it's this, from our point of view, this resolution is not directed against Israel, and it's a little bit, as I told you, over-politicized. And finally, I can tell you that the resolution has been prepared by, I think, Egypt and Palestinian autonomy. They have been speaking about the safety of some Muslim relics which are on Temple Mount, on Mount of Temple. That's why it was just designed for that. But again, from our point of view, it was, first of all, has been a resolution which has been adopted and discussed many years before. Secondly, it says in the preamble that Jerusalem is and now this is a saint place for three religions. And finally, no reasonable people can ever deny the link of Israel and Jewish people to Mount of Temple. And I can tell you that my deputy minister, Gennady Gatilov, was specially 10 days after this thing had passed in Paris, he went to Tel Aviv and gave all necessary explanations. It was done in October last year. You can check in your files that Gatilov, Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, went specially to Israel to explain what we never meant that against Israel. But it is the same resolution which has been passed always,
However, you are the Russian ambassador here in Mexico, so let's move on to local topics. How is the relationship amongst both countries?
Well, I can tell you we are not bad. They are friendly, constructive. We have a history, official history of now about 130 years of diplomatic relations. At one time, Russia and Mexico, Imperial Russia, and independent Mexico, I'm not speaking Mexico as a Spanish colony, but independent Mexico, they have been neighbors. Can you imagine? In California.
I didn't know that.
Half of California was Mexican till 1846. Half of California was Russian Empire.
Of course.
Yeah, border was next to the San Francisco, a little bit higher than San Francisco. That's why, as I told you, we have a very rich and interesting history. We have relations on all levels: political, humanitarian, cultural, economic. Well, economic relations are not so strong. By the way, they're almost same size as between Russia and Israel. It's about $2 billion every year, the trade. But again, we have everything from different sector of economy. We supply here planes, we supply here fertilizers, we supply here some petroleum and products of petroleum, some electric machinery. We supply here trigo, we supply here metals. They supply us from Mexico to Russia, especially it's automotrice, it's spare part, it's autos, agricultural products. By the way, as well as we have with Israel. Mm-hmm. Do you know that almost 1/3, even more a little bit, exportation from Israel to Russia, this is agricultural products.
Yeah, I know.
We also have a big trade with Mexico with agricultural products. Well, we have meetings on a political level. Well, just recently, my president met with Peña Nieto during the G20 summit in Hamburg. We exchanged, we had a short conversation. We have political consultations on level of a deputy foreign ministers. We have meetings on the level of minister for, well, we have a very good parliamentary relations. No, overall relations are good and friendly. But of course, Russia is far away. There is yes, there is different of languages, different of cultures. By the way, Russian people like very much Mexican culture. Just recently during the games of Copa de Confederaciones, just in July, when Mexican team was playing in Russia, in cities Kazan and Sochi, because I know that I have some friends, Mexican friends, who came back from Russia and they were saying that they have been greeted very friendly. That's why, just to summarize, I can tell you, we don't complain. Though we understand that Mexico has other big partners, big socios. Let's say Mexico has very strong and huge relations with neighbors of United States and Canada. Mexico has big relations with European Union, and Mexico has its own priorities in foreign policy. But in main things, our priorities coincide. Mexico, like Russia, is for strengthening international law. We are for leading role of a Organization of United Nations. We are for multipolar world. We understand that now there is no one country in the world who can really dictate or dominate or say what is good, what is bad. There are so many different centers of power now. Don't forget China, or India, or Brazil, or Mexico, or South Africa, etc., etc. That's why we have a lot of, let's say, things which coincide, you know, and we have a good understanding.
How many people make up the Russian community in Mexico, and how do you describe the contributions of that community in this country?
Well, we don't have specific figures because by our laws, Russians who live here, they are not obliged to register. We can just judge by numbers which are given to us by immigration offices, by Secretaría de Gobernación. They say it's about 25,000 Russians who live in all Mexico. Who they are? We have representatives of a first wave of immigration which came here after Russian Revolution, which will celebrate this year 100 years, in early 20s. We have here people who came here after Second World War, but mostly they came here after collapse of Soviet Union in early 90s. Who they are? They are mostly people of liberal professions. Scientists, musicians, artists, academicians, sport people. We have here a lot of Russian, you mentioned Russian girls. Well, Russian ladies who married to Mexican students, because especially in 60s and 70s has been very huge program of educational exchanges, and a lot of Mexicans, thousands of Mexicans were studying in Russian universities, and they came back in most of cases with Russian wives. And what they do, well, we have here very famous scientists, by the way. At UNAM we have very big names in mathematics. We have big names in electronics. In Ensenada, in California, there is big scientific center, which is called like Silicon Valley of Mexico. And there are a lot of Russian scientists there. We have a lot, as I told you, a lot of musicians. Almost in every symphony orchestra in Mexico, you can always find Russian musicians. But speaking about our contribution, you will be surprised to know that one of the first engineers who started oil business in Mexico were Russians.
Wow.
In 20s. We had Russians here in field of culture. If you remember, in 20s has been very big exchange between Soviet Union, young Soviet Union, and Mexico. For example, we had here famous Sergei Eisenstein, very famous Russian movie director who was doing movie here in Mexico called Viva Mexico. We had a famous Russian poet Mayakovsky, Diego Rivera and Siqueiros, David Siqueiros went to Russia. We had here famous ballerina Pavlova, who danced here in Bellas Artes. We had here famous musician, composer Stravinsky during Second World War. What I'm trying to say, really, there is a big exchanges, inter-exchanges between Russian and Mexican culture, which makes our relations more solid and more friendly.
So, Ambassador, finally, as you said, Mexico and Russia are countries with a big difference in language and climate. How has your diplomatic stay here been?
Well, as I mentioned to you, Russia and Mexico, we always had good relations. We had strong, friendly relations. And I can tell you that I always felt this warm, this goodness, this, friendship among my Mexican friends and partners. When we were speaking about relations, I didn't mention tourism. Russian tourism here, it's not so big, but because we have now problems with our communications, there is no direct flights from Russia to Mexico, and they have to go through different states. But at one time, 2 years ago, it was almost high, it was 140 or 50,000 people a year. It's a big number. Of course, not as Americans come or what other people come or Canadians come, but it was a rather big number. And I was asking them, why you come here? It's so far away. It's, it's not cheap. It's expensive. Well, if you need a good, warm war, why not to go to Eilat, as a lot of Russians do, that the spas and playas of Israel and Egypt are most favorite because we are very close to Russia and there is, very short flight. And why you come here to Mexico? It's so far away. They were saying they feel here like home. They don't feel any animosity. They feel really warm hearts. And Mexicans, like Russians, very often, they are very heartful, They alma, it's a language alma to alma, really. And that's why it's very pleasant. And I can tell you that I'm satisfied. I didn't expect. Before coming here, I worked many years in the United States. I didn't expect that Mexico will really make me fall in love with this country, by its culture, by its traditions, by its beauty, and especially by its people. Mexicans are really very nice, very friendly, great people.
Ambassador, thank you for this interview. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me at your emission. I would like to tell you that for me it's an honor to share my views with you, with your journal, with your magazine, and I would like to tell you that I'm absolutely evident that and confident that relations which exist not only between Russia and Israel, or between Russia and Mexicans, we're all in the same boat.
Of course.
And we have to join our forces, especially now when we face all these threats and challenges are same to everybody. There are many important things, this global climate change, endemic diseases, the danger of terrorism, the problem of water. Soon we'll all face the problem of water because water resources are just diminishing, and so on and so on. Of course we have to work together. This is my main message. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Hasta luego.
Hasta
Gracias.
luego.
Gracias.